Um, I'm thrilled to be introducing our November speaker, Dr. Lu Salman Canales. What is obviously so great about this is that we're welcoming her back. She's been involved with the Catch the Next Familia for a long time. She served on our board. I know that she will introduce herself and in terms of speaking about the expertise and all of the many experiences in education that she has, but I think that you would be hard pressed to find someone who has just the breadth and depth of experience in both the K-12 sector and in higher education in terms of furthering um, education for Latinos in particular in the RGV. So we are thrilled to have her and know that she's very well loved within the CTN Familia. So without further ado, Dr. Canales, I will throw it over to you.
Hola, Maria Marta. I will say, let me get started.
Hello, Lu Salman. Welcome.
Gracias. I was sharing with Aaron and Jose that I threw out half of my presentation last night and decided to do something a little different so that I can share some new and emerging data that came out of the Hope Center. So I changed the title of the presentation last night and everything because I think it's important for us to talk about equity pre and post pandemic because there's some new things that we need to be really aware. And if we thought that equity was an issue before, it's been amplified even more. And the pandemic has really solidified, I think, and brought attention to equity issues because many of us who had not experienced some of the challenges are now experiencing them. So they're becoming amplified, right? And so just a little bit about who I am. I won't read it to you, but I do have like over 30 some years of experience in doing work. Both I'm very blessed that I started my career in the university sector, then transitioned to the community college sector, then went to the nonprofit sector, went back to the university, and now I'm back in nonprofit. And so have spent a lot of time both on the academic side, on the workforce side, and on the student success side. So have been, like I said, really just blessed with experience that has helped me really understand the whole cradle to career piece. I happen to sit on a school board, so I get the K through 12. I help design the first 4 early college high schools partnerships at South Texas College. Although, right, Mario, Nick will take credit for that. I'm actually the one that designed the first 4, and so lots and lots of fun. The community college is always and will always be in my blood and in the heart of the work that I do. So I want to share a little bit about equity as we think about equity pre-pandemic. And so if I would have done this, if I would have done this like last week, I would have shared a whole bunch of data that still showed all the, all of the gaps in data at the state of Texas, that no matter how much we have worked, we are actually not closing the gap in Texas. The gap between different subgroups of students has actually increased. And as you might imagine, the pandemic will not be good to the equity agenda of the state. But if you think about how we started the whole equity discussions, it really started about trying to differentiate between equality and equity. When you think about equality, it really just assumes that everybody benefits from the same supports, right? Just give them all the same treatment. Let's put them all through the same orientation, the same advising, the same everything. Then you began to think about, well, let's give some a little bit more. So it still puts it all on the student, right? Like, let's just give them a little bit more supports and they'll be just as successful. Then we went into this whole arena of equity being removing systems barriers, right? Let's just remove the fence. Let them come in where they are. Let's meet students where they are, and let's remove the barriers. This is the way we've talked about equity. And then the Center for Urban Education and Dr. DeSimone and her team in California really began to unpack equity in a different way, to think about really imagining if the world was really equal, right? but it really isn't. So we have these mental models about what we put together. And so what they talk about at the Center for Urban Education is students don't come in together at the same access. We know that there are some community schools where students don't even have access to an ACT or an SAT, right? I mean, in the Valley, Mario knows because we looked at the data, there are some kids that don't have an opportunity to take algebra in 8th grade. Therefore, they don't have the opportunity to take 4 rigorous math, upper level math in high school to get them to calculus at the university or at the college, right? So we know that students start at different places just because of where they live or the circumstances. We also know that there are lots of schools throughout the country that are funded less, right? That there are schools that get teachers, unfortunately, that are the least prepared teachers, right? Where the ratios of supports are different, where the curriculum is accelerated, not because it's a good thing, but because they are focused on not what's best for students. Not only that, but then students who are coming in, our students of color, our low income students are coming in and they are experiencing a system that has disproportionate remediation, right? They are faced with implicit bias, many of them with microaggressions. And you can look right there, right under the apple on my bookshelf, and it's my dissertation. And even in the Valley, that's 90% Latino, 95% Latino. In my focus groups, you would not imagine what it did to me to hear our students in the Valley talk about the microaggressions that they're feeling here at home. It's unacceptable, right? To be called an other, or people like you, or the them, right? Like, our students are experiencing this because of the way that the systems are set up. So they talk about, if we really want to look, and folks talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so they say, well, let's just become more diverse. Let's just bring more. But we're still not dealing with the issue that the more are still coming into a broken system, right? And so if we're really going to be equity focused, equity minded, if we're going to be student success focused, we need to turn the mirror on the institution and think about the experiences that we're creating for students, right? And how our systems and processes and policies are set up to either hinder and continue to create those broken paths for students, or that they're there to create a seamless process or pathway for students. And community colleges, let me tell you, the last 2 years that I spent at the university, I will tell you, community colleges are doing God's work, because community colleges are at least looking at themselves in the mirror through the guided pathways work. You're doing some really hard work. You really are committed to disaggregating and analyzing the data, not just to admire it, but to do something about it, to better understand the student experience. So when you really are looking at equity, according to Dr. DeSimone and her team, if we're focused on that, it should show up in our budgets. And the diversity, equity, and inclusion shouldn't be an officer in the corner at HR or in an office. It really should be everyone. It should be embedded in everything that we do. And so when we talk about how to achieve student success, and when we're talking about equity, right? It's really important. I was a coach for Achieving the Dream, gosh, since 2009 until this year, and then a guided pathways coach. And it was really interesting because I could walk onto a campus and tell you whether that campus had a serious commitment to equity and whether they were culturally competent. And I could tell you in the first 20 minutes on campus, because it shows up in how people talk. It shows up in how the practices and the narrative and how they talk about their students. It shows up in your policies, in your procedures, in all of that. And so this is one thing, and I'm not going to read to you all because I know you can read and the presentation will go to you. But how to achieve student success is really to critically assess and change your practices as an institution, right? So how do we continuously look at ourselves, relook at ourselves? These are not like one and done. You're always having to look at. Now compound that for places like the Valley. we were very blessed in the Valley that we're 90-some% Latino, and the majority of our kids are low income. So we could put race and ethnicity on the corner along with poverty. It forced us to really look at who are our students, right? I'll give you an example. When I was at UTRGV, we were looking at student success, and we said, who are our students? I asked my team when I started there, and they're like, well, they're first generation, they're Latino. And I'm like, no, who are our kids? Who are they when they show up in the door? How are we differentiating for them, right? How do we know what they need? And we ended up finding out, for example, that 60% of our kids came in with significant dual credit. 40% came in with 0 credits. The kids that came to us with significant dual credit were 12% more likely to be successful in credit accumulations and retention and on pathways to graduation. So there's a lot, like, who are your kids, right? Like, what are their demographics? Who are they? It's important to know that. And I am not good at checking the chat. So I've asked Jose if he could be looking at the chat and see if people have questions. Feel free to ask. He will read them to me, right, Jose? And have me pause. Another, is there a question?
No, there's just a comment by Jennifer that was that the microaggression I heard today was a student saying, "Oh, their WhatsApp number, their number is from Mexico." One of my students said it was in a demeaning way, and he had to check for them.
Yeah, and so, like, they show up in many ways, right? Yeah, and so it's this whole, even like right now I work for a national nonprofit that's focused on working with minority serving colleges of education to diversify, to diversify and to increase the quality of teacher preparation programs. And even that, we look at how we place students. Where are they placed? If a student doesn't look like the community that they're serving, how are we preparing them so that they're not just observers in the community, but that they are embedded in the community and are able to serve students in those communities and not come in with assumptions about who those students are, right? So another way to achieve student success is really to counter the interpretations that fail to notice racial inequities. And I'm just going to be very blunt. Those of you who know me know me. I'm very blunt. So this idea that we don't see color, there is color, right? Even white is a color. And so being able to own up, what is happening between and among groups is really, really important. And then also being able to unapologetically provide support and resources and meet students where they are. Because we saw that some students really start behind, and not because of any issue that they have. Now, I could spend, I promise you, about 3 to 4 hours just on the work that the Center for Urban Education does on equity mindedness, but I thought that I might introduce you just to the principles at this point. So, to do equity by design, one of the things, the first things that the Dr. De Simone and her staff talk about is clarity of in language and goals and measures is vital to effective equitable practices. So being able to have a language on how we talk about equity, does it show up in your strategic plan? Does it show up in how you measure student success? And it should be a guiding paradigm for language and action, right? And also equitable practices and policies that are designed to accommodate differences. When we redesigned the advising process at UTRGV a couple of years ago, we really began to say, how do we differentiate for our students? If you are a third generation child, the daughter of or son of scholars, right, of faculty, or of even me, or someone like me, I'm going to need very, very different onboarding than a student coming in from a low income community where their parent has an 8th grade education or barely a high school diploma, right? So being able to differentiate how you onboard students is really important. But also, if you heard me talk about those coming in with dual credit or credits accumulated versus those not, The onboarding that a student coming in with an associate's degree from a community college is very different than the onboarding a student coming in with 0 credits has, right? And so being able to think about those things is important. How to operationalize and enact equity, it really is continuous. You can't say it's one and done. Oh, we're going to look at it at the end of the year with our institutional effectiveness report. It really has to be done in an ongoing basis. Data has to be disaggregated. And we always have to be questioning our assumptions and what we know and don't know about the data, right? I always say that it's not about the data, it's about engaging stakeholders around making sense of what it means so that we can create action to improve. And then being able for it to be institution and system wide. It can't belong to some office. I just did a virtual site visit where the same name of the same person kept coming up as the person doing the equity work. And I'm like, that's awesome for that person, but what about everyone else, right? In the institution, who owns it? And so things to consider. And we don't think about these things, like other ways that equity either shows up or doesn't. Do you look at reports on who's participating in your honors programs? Who's getting institutional scholarships, undergraduate scholarships? Who's in your internships and in your workplace experiences? Who are you surveying? Who's responding to your surveys? So all of these things in your scorecard, have you and your board adopted equity indicators, or are you still at the typical indicators? Do you routinely review and discuss policies and practices from an equity lens? Not just for compliance, not just for accreditation, but for do they help or do they hinder? Do you understand the impact that these policies and practices have on diverse subgroups? Mario, you may be too young to remember this, but in the early years of STC, we thought we were doing the right thing by giving students debit cards, JAG cards for their financial aid. And we found that especially the males were refusing to use it. Nobody asked them if they wanted it. None of us thought about like the implications about what it meant. When we did a focus group of the students, we found out that they felt like they were being outed for being on financial aid because it was like the Lone Star card, right? It was like people knew that they were on financial aid. And so like something that was a practice that was put in place to help the business office get the money out quicker actually ended up creating a barrier for our students. So understanding those things is important. And then routinely, engaging diverse groups of students. One thing that I will forever and a day be proud of the work we did at STC is every year we would conduct, and I think they still conduct, 22 to 25 focus groups of students. Every year. It became part of the way we did work to understand and create a space for voice so that we understood the student experience. Then also, we need to begin to move from leading indicators from lagging indicators to leading indicators. If you look at the right-hand side, we always talk about graduation, retention, completion of the general core and transfer. We need to be looking at those milestones that students need to reach. So for example, we found that if students can complete the first academic math and English course in the first year, they're more likely to complete their degree. We need to complete, which is that second major bullet there, right? Being able to finish remediation, developmental coursework in 1 year. Credit accumulation is really important. If you haven't looked at looking at if a student completes 80% of their coursework in the semester, they're really likely to continue, which means they can only fail like one course, right? And not do well in one course. But the hours earned in the summer are another predictor of continuous enrollment and progression. Full-time enrollment, these are not new to you. When they register matters, the policies that you have on that. And then campus engagement, how students engage with the campus in and out of the classroom is important. So if you all are still looking at traditional lagging indicators, you may not be looking at the indicators that would tell you more about whether equity is happening or not in your institution. So this is the part of the presentation that I changed last night because I ran across this report for something else that I was doing, and I thought, the pandemic is not just creating new issues, it's even amplifying equity issues. So this report, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Hope Center. If you're part of Achieving the Dream, you've probably seen some of the presentations of the founder of the Hope Center. She looks at food insecurity, housing insecurity. I mean, they've been doing that work now for several years. Well, this report just came out, and I have the link there, and I will be sending the slide deck to the team so that they can distribute it. And this data is really disturbing, right? Because the pandemic, we know, is hitting everyone, but it has increased, exacerbated the equity issues that already existed. And the interesting thing in that they looked at also just like employment and other things that we know folks are struggling with. And so I'm going to deconstruct this a little bit for you in one data point at a time. So 5.8, almost 6 out of every 10 students experience basic need insecurity due to the pandemic. So imagine if we're not even talking about technology and access to your classes and all of those things. This is just basic needs, basic Maslow's, right? And so when we look at the basic needs insecurity by race, we see that there's a 19 percentage point difference between Blacks and whites, right? So this is another way to look at basic needs. So yes, it's gotten worse for everyone, but it's gotten even worse for the same group of students that we already had equity issues with. Basic needs insecurity by parenting status. This one surprised me, right? So where it used to be where we would see that, students who were also parents, I expected this to be a little larger, but now the non-parenting group has caught up to that, right? So everyone is experiencing these insecurities. Then when we look at impact, if you look on the left-hand side facing the screen, the job security by students that were employed pre-pandemic by college type, right? You can see that 33% of students and in 2-year institutions and 42% of students in 4-year institutions are reporting that they lost their job. But when you combine that with how many their hours were reduced, I mean, it gets a little more serious. And then when you look at the right-hand side, when you look at basic need insecurity among students employed pre-pandemic by impacts on job security, just by impact on job security, 69% of students lost their jobs. So when we're asking folks, right, like one of the things that we've been talking around the country now is like, what's the biggest gift we can give students right now? It's a gift of empathy and understanding, right? Like they are going through some really serious issues. Level of anxiety among survey respondents by college type. Very equal between 2 and 4-year students, right? When you look at moderate and severe, 49% in 2-year and 52% in 4-year. So when we look at academic challenges by type of college, you can also see that one of the biggest issues that students are finding is the inability to concentrate on school, right? Between 2 and 4-year institutions. And look at the number that say that they have to take care of family members while going to school. So you can see that we think it's the technology, we think it's the internet, we think, right? We make assumptions. And so we're beginning to really, through these surveys and through this research, understand what some of those things are. And I'm getting ready to wrap it up. So one of the things I think that we're struggling with right now is ambiguity. You know, do we go this way? Do we go that way? Like we don't know. You know, we don't know if students are going to be with us face to face. Are they going to be with us virtually? Are they going, you know, are the seniors going to come to college when they graduate? Like there's so much uncertainty. And I want to introduce a concept that I will not be able to get in depth with you, but right now, I'm doing a lot of training on the difference on adaptive leadership and understanding that we can no longer try and solve the student success issues as if they're technical problems. We really need to elevate and think about them as adaptive challenges. So I'll give you an example, food insecurity. Many of us have pantries in our schools, or we do certain things to support students. So the food insecurity, solving it with a food pantry is solving it with a technical problem. As if it's a technical problem, we solve it right now. You see it with the school districts feeding students on a daily basis. But we're really not solving the big issue of homelessness and all of those things. That's an adaptive challenge where you cannot solve it on your own and you need other folks to come in and help you solve it. A lot of your communities are doing collective impact, and it's one way, right, to try and approach some of these. I wish I had like another 2 hours just to talk to you about technical and adaptive challenges and how to solve them. But I think that the first step for you all is to think, as you're thinking about equity, as you're thinking about student success, you need to begin to differentiate whether the problem you're trying to solve is a technical problem for which you have control and you can solve with your institutional dollars, institutional resources, institutional staff, or whether it's an adaptive challenge that's bigger than you and your institution and you need to bring other stakeholders to help you navigate that problem. Because at the end of the day, if our students can't cross the stage either in person or virtually, with this, we have not met our commitment to our community. And so I'm going to stop sharing and see if anyone has any questions. I know I went a little fast, but there we go.
You may want to look at the chat box. I know there was a question from Mario.
Mario, communication and training at administrative level is vital. Yeah, at large equity issues. A vast majority of institutions. Yep, also training can faculty grow, creating, amplifying equity issues. You know, Mario, where are you? You're over here. You're on my Brady Bunch on this side. You know, I don't know, right? Because everything is contextual. So I would have to go through a process of asking, where are you right now in having equity conversations? Are you having superficial conversations and training, or is the institution seriously doing some equity centered work, right? And so is the institution having serious and courageous conversations about equity and what it means enough to provide? And I don't even think that training is the right word for it anymore. How are we developing people's capacity to understand? And to me, that's very different, right? Because training is a one and done. Is there an equity agenda where people are really saying, here's who we are and where we are, no judgment. We just have to acknowledge this is where we are. And these are the milestones that we can hope, right, to accomplish. And we're all in, right? And so I think there's multiple things, because the first one is, at the very basic, do you even know what your equity issues are? You know, that's the first question, right? And things like that. Okay, did I answer your question, Mario? I don't think so, but.
Yes, I mean, just to kind of expound on it, you know, yes, it takes the college has to approach it from an administrative goal, and that way we all have the same message and understanding of what we're trying to work towards. But just the fact that faculty create and amplify a lot of those, you know, equity issues directly to the students, and that they have the most contact and communication with the students. I think that we need to help the faculty, like you said. I mean, just how do you develop empathy for those faculty, and of course, without compromising the integrity that they want to, you know, encourage in their classes. but yet helping them understand that each student is diverse and has unique needs. And every situation is just unique and different. Every semester is not the same. Every class isn't the same. And, you know, it requires a unique approach where faculty have a mentality of, you know, class A, B, C, and D, and they all get the same treatment because they're all the same class.
But are they the same class?
No, they're not. And that's what I'm saying. Faculty have that, you know, they want to do that.
Yeah, and I see, can technical problems be a Band-Aid approach to systemic barriers that need to be dismantled? Absolutely, right? So a technical solution to a problem, you know, like I'll use food insecurity again. Yes, a pantry can help us solve, but imagine a student has to walk through several offices and hallways to go ask for food, right? And so we think we're solving for that. In a way, the way we've approached developmental education has been a Band-Aid, right? We haven't addressed the whole student need also. And so, and we know that developmental education is an adaptive challenge, because we really should have university, community college, and K-12 working together to understand what the real issue is on why students are coming in with gaps, right? And so, but we've been trying to solve it as a technical problem that the community college can solve on its own, right? Let's create an assessment, let's create courses without any input, you know, or co-construction or co-design with other partners. Oh, there's a comment in there that ACC is providing a course for faculty on teaching and equity mindedness. That's awesome. Each of these experiences you've mentioned is what I heard directly from Latinx students in the spring and fall. It's almost, how are we helping others to shift their praxis? Yeah. What are their knowing how help students become conscious who they are leaving out? Then how are they working to use this to inform their practices? Absolutely. Is there specific framework like critical race theory that you've implemented? I would say, so yes and no. So it's really interesting, because I think that that's the question to the critical race theory. I think that if we are one theory based, we miss the boat. So I like to look at several frameworks and theories to inform the work. So for example, I wish you could see the work that my books and all of that I have open right now and on the floor and everywhere, because I'm trying to design a leadership learning, a fellowship for new deans of colleges of ed. And one of the things that I was asked to do is to really look at adaptive leadership is the framework for it. And I said, wait, that's not the only one I can use. I'm also using inclusive leadership, right? And how you develop that. And I'm also using the work of, where's my guy? Of Cruz and Posner's work on the leadership challenge, right? So I'm actually using 3 different frameworks to inform the fellowship that I'm developing for leadership learning and activation, you know, because it's not enough just to learn. How do you demonstrate that you've learned it? And so I believe that you need to pull from several things, and more importantly, the context matters. Like critical race theory is important, but in the context of the Valley, people may not connect with it because they think that all Latinos are the same, right? And if anything, this election has, you know, this year has really taught us is none of us are monolithic, right? We all come with different backgrounds and different cultures, even within the Valley. If I drive 20 minutes east to Westlaco, it's very different than if I drive 15 minutes west to Rio Grande. Even going to Edinburgh versus McAllen versus, you know, the Far San Juan Alamo area. Something we did in Westlaco campus would not work in Rio Grande. And so it's really just understanding it all, I think.
I was gonna say, I'm familiar with all of those works. I was gonna say, one of the other models that I use specifically with leadership practice, leadership education. I'm a leadership educator. I'm a doc student, but is the culturally relevant leadership learning model. So it considers several different dimensions and the identity, the efficacy and capacity of each of the students, and kind of using that as a framework. But it's really hard to kind of think of something that one, all of the faculty and staff can get behind.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I think the challenge there is also, you're not just giving them something that's, okay, I did a module, I'll do it. But it's trying to shift their mindset to, as they're engaging in their work, have somewhat of a filter to ask questions and make decisions that are more equitable before implementing something that leaves many people out. So
yeah. And so Jennifer, I would say as a yes and, right? Because I do think that different people from different educational backgrounds will bring different things, right? Like I come from the School of Business initially, so I'll bring a lot of like Jim Collins's work on Good to Great, right? Like from chapter 3, I will pull people first. It's not important, to have any, people with the right skills on the bus. It's having people with the right attitude on the bus, right? Because it's like having the right people on the bus. If I need to shift at a pandemic, those people will shift with me, right? And if I have people just because they're content experts or whatever, they may not be able to shift, and so I would say it's understanding the lens that people are bringing and the why behind the lens, right? Because I always say, like, you cannot change a culture. I'm one of those that I'm like, you walk in, if you go in with the attitude, I'm going to change the culture, you can't, but you can co-construct a culture with, right? And you can begin, and even that is very different. It's kind of like when people have been beat up so much, I heard this podcast about grief and this idea that we tell people it's time to move on. And that it's one of the most hurtful things that you can tell someone is just to move on, right? That it's even just saying, it's time that we move forward, or I'm happy that we can move forward, because you're not asking them to leave behind everything that they loved about the individual or about the institution. Mario can tell you, when we changed the name at South Texas College from South Texas Community College, I remember something Dr. Reed did very well. She said, we are asking you to leave our beloved South Texas Community College that we all love, but we're all going to move forward with South Texas College because it presents new opportunities for our community and our students. But she didn't ask us just to forget that we were ever STCC. Actually, she never was able to say STC by itself. She kept using the second C, right? And so that was really important. Alejandra, how do we approach the attitude to faculty without sounding offensive? And I agree. I don't think that it's a faculty issue or an administrative issue. It's a human issue, right? And so as humans, I think we need to acknowledge that we all come with our lived experience. So for anyone who has taken adult education courses, the first thing that I learned in my very first adult ed course was adults bring their lived experience with them, right? So if you're going to teach adults, you allow them to bring their lived experience with you, but yet we expect for our faculty not to bring theirs. We expect our administrators not to bring theirs. And so how do we create a safe space where it's okay to be different, acknowledge that we're all different, right? And that we all bring something different. And so we're not asking folks to leave who they are behind. We're asking folks to come on a journey, right? To challenge themselves and stretch themselves. If you looked at the Center for Urban Education, they talk a lot about language matters, right? The narrative that we use to talk about equity matters. That doesn't mean we, excuse my language, pussyfoot around it or tiptoe around it. It means that we create intentional language for it, right? Like I'm 56 years old. If someone tries to come and tell me it's time for you to change everything you think and let's just move in a different direction, and that's not what we need. I think, and Maria Marta knows me enough, and Mario, for me, it's about how do we co-construct. I remember when I recruited Mario to take over a grant, I said, Mario, do you want to come on a journey with me? And he's like, but I've never done this. I'm a brand new faculty member. I'm like, let me show you the way, right? Let's co-construct what this grant should look like. And he came. As naive as he was as a young faculty member, he came and he trusted that we would go on this journey together. And so, yeah. Okay, bridges, managing transitions makes, yeah. And that's, I don't know how we're doing on time, Juan
We're doing
Jose.
fine.
Okay. Yeah, and so guys, it really is, it's I always say it's not the destination, it's a journey. And one of the things that we need to do is give ourselves grace for trying something and failing at it, right? And collective impact, when I was leading the collective impact work, I would say it's better to fail forward than it is to always be successful, because when you're always successful, it means you're not stretching yourself enough, right? But when you fail, but you fell forward with that learning, you have grown more than when you do everything, that everything right. The other thing is, people talk about we need to innovate. I'm sorry, but unless you're discovering electricity all over again, it's very, very, very rare to innovate. We're either adapting something that's already out there, or we're constructing something off of something else. But innovation is, I think we've sold ourselves a bill of goods when we say we're innovating. We're really just trying to solve a problem right now. There's very, very little innovation really happening. And I think that's a problem, because when we talk about faculty, we're asking them to stretch and to stretch, to do some new innovation, to do something new, when we really should probably be saying, how can you do more of what you're already doing well and amplify success, right? And so, yeah.
So under Alejandra's question, she had a second question there. It says they immediately feel attacked when I suggest training. How do I approach administrators and faculty to really change the way we teach underserved students?
I think that it's really by creating the space where the voice of the families and the students can be heard, right? It's really by letting the data tell the story. I don't know, do we have anybody from Austin on the line?
Yes.
Yes, me,
Who's me?
Alejandra.
Okay.
Like for example,
I am too.
Salma, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example. I am trying to develop the schedule of classes,
Uh-huh.
and then I approach faculty, and then we have problems with transferability. We follow the model of English 1301, English 1302, integrated reading and writing in the first semester. But then in the second semester, we offer an extra course, and it's been very difficult to bring faculty to join the program. And some faculty, believe it or not, think that they have to lower their expectations. And that's when I tell them, no, it's not, that's not the case. And then, well, you have such amount of students failing these classes, you are setting them for failure. If we include history, for example, you should teach them Spanish. And I was like, well, but they qualify, they're perfectly fine taking history because they already are TSI completed, and they completed a course of English. So what's wrong with taking, for example, history? And so they immediately feel offended. And then how do I explain to them? I mean, they are not willing to accommodate their curriculum to the student. They want the student to change. So how do I approach this difficult conversation that they need to adapt to the needs? I mean, the world is changing. We are changing. And the new generation of students is in different colors here. And the way we teach is not the same that we had 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So we need to accommodate and change. So how do I approach this difficult topic without sounding offensive, without like they immediately think that I'm lowering the standard that because we want them to be part of us in there, or you want me to pass students automatically. Or they make this assumption that our students don't have that capacity. How like baby steps, give me an example.
Yeah. And so an example first is that people many times confuse language with literacy, right? And so people will say, oh, teach him Spanish. Well, no, teach him in Spanish. Well, no, it's not a language issue, right?
No.
So people, I'm getting ready to do a JAG, a joint action group on linguistic diversity, to really think about the role of language in teaching and learning. And for people to really understand the different kind of frameworks that people are using, right? Like translanguaging is now an actual a research frame where people are looking at new language that's being created, like what we used to call Tex-Mex, right? Like people used to look down, oh, estás hablando pocho, that's not a real language.
No, but that's not even they're telling me. They're not telling me to teach them in Spanish. They're telling me to include a course of Spanish instead of history or instead of math.
Oh, okay. So part of that, then you just need to hit them with, this is the same problems that we have with dual credit. 16-year-olds cannot really do that. They don't have the capacity. They don't have. So when I start talking to folks about what students can and cannot do, I ask them to clearly articulate student learning outcomes and competencies students must know, right? Because then it's not about the what, and it also has to include the how, right? Because Mario, do you remember when we did the DEI grant that we contextualized reading and writing, and what we did is we talked to the DevEd faculty and we said, if you can help bring context to the why the reading is important to learn, right? So then we worked with some publishers to create I think we contextualized it up to 60%, so help students make the connection between why they need to, increase their competencies or their skill sets for reading to be able to be more successful over here. So we partnered with the history faculty to develop these little units, right? And then we did find that students were more successful. The thing about it, I'm gonna give you another example. When I was leading the continuing ed unit with Juan Carlos, we received a grant to help adult ed students accelerate into an on-ramp to a credit level course, right? So Juan Carlos and I thought, if we're doing dual credit with 15, 16, and 17-year-olds, why can't we do it with adults? So let's think about the state of Texas through the WECM allows us, right? The WECM and the GIPWE, they have the outcomes, they have all of that. So let's work. I went with the hardest program. I said, let's work with Dean Melba Trevino, and let's see if she will allow our students to take 2 courses in the nursing program through continuing ed. And if they pass those 2 courses, and once they pass the GED, she will give them those 6 credits when they come over here. We did a cohort of 22. All 22 finished an ADN.
Wow.
And we ended up creating 15 pathways, because once Melba said yes to nursing, it was hard for Mario Reina to tell me no on welding, on automotive, on those programs, right? So a lot of it is about, and Juan Carlos and I did that. We said, what are the non-negotiables? What must students know in order to be successful? Because the state of Texas allows us to do those things, right? So we have the tools, we have the resources, we know how to do it. So tell us. And so what we found was, for example, Melba looked at our phlebotomy curriculum and she said, holy cow, they're learning more in phlebotomy from you, that if they pass phlebotomy for you, we will give them the credit over here on this side of the house also. So it's about helping people understand that they're not just teaching a course, they're teaching competencies, they're teaching skill sets, right? And what are they? And those should be the non-negotiables, but not like who gets in. If a student demonstrates that they can do it through some assessment that they've already taken, it's like, to me, it's this fear of the unknown that stops faculty. Because we did a focus group with the nursing faculty before and after. And before it was, you're setting them up to fail. These people, many of them can't even speak proper English. Nursing is hard. And when they passed,
that's what I tell them. But you mentioned something that the institution needs to look themselves in the mirror.
Absolutely.
So that's something that is going to resonate in my mind. But I mean, it's also it's changing a culture. So and that's kind of like,
well, and remember, you're not going to be able to change the culture. I think you need to co-construct a culture with those faculty. in the early years of when we started the Ascender program, the Catch the Next program, and Maria Marta knows, like, we had to sell it. There was a reason why I chose STC, El Paso, and Alamo colleges, right, Maria Marta? It was Palo Alto. And it was because those 3 vice presidents had the ability to look internally and say yes. And it wasn't always like in El Paso, it was a VP of academic affairs. At STC, it was student affairs. Actually, in Palo Alto, Mike was the VP of student affairs there too. And so we found a champion at the college that said kids can, and it was a champion that could change policy and practice, right? And then we always said, and I will tell you another thing, Alejandra, find the willing and able, find one guy, one gal that will come on the
Yeah,
journey.
that's what I'm doing. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm finding the allies, and we have several
Yeah.
champions at ACC. I'm finding the allies, but are still, despite the fact that we've been very successful for the past 6 years, I feel like that we still need to justify our existence, and it's very, like, you feel so exhausted at the end of the day, you know, to it's kind of like you are a salesperson, but you feel drained, you know.
Well, and part of it is that you're seen as a program, right? You're seen as a separate thing. And so helping an institute see what they should be doing differently is hard. Like when I was at UTRGV, the staff advising was the root of all evil. They were responsible for everything that went wrong, right? And advising was one of the units that I had. And within 3 months, with one data point, I convinced Dr. Bailey that they were not the enemy. That if a student saw an advisor in the first year only once, they were retained at 89% versus 43% if they were not. But that we could not see students if we had an almost 600-to-1 ratio. And before I left, he committed 32 new advisors to advising, and we went from almost 600 to 320 to 1 over 2 years. And I just followed up with Jonica to see if he gave them the last 16, and he did this fall, even with COVID, right? And so being able to use data to tell your story of success. And I know that it's really hard, but you need to find an administrative ally and champion. You know, someone, and STC, that was me. That's why Maria Marta and John came to me when we had that, right? Like Mona, I love Mona because Mona is the administrative champion at her college, right? And like finding who's the influencer at your college, whether it's through an official role or an unofficial role, like who can influence? Who has the ear?
So, are you willing to share with me, like, just for private purposes, I won't publish it or anything, your presentation, just to have some of the things just as a reference?
No, I'll send it to the team that I was communicating with, and they'll get it out to you all.
Great. Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, we're running out of time, and I know that we hate to bring this part of the conversation to an end. You are so insightful, and you're such a valuable thinker to our community. We really appreciate everything that you have done in the past, and we thank you in advance for all that you're going to do in the future. I wanted to take this opportunity to actually recognize Dr. Canales for the leadership role that she has played with Catch the Next since 2011. And I thought that Thanksgiving was the perfect season for us to acknowledge the role that you played in the creation of our program in Texas. And we were actually going to recognize you last March when we were coming to McAllen for the spring seminar. But of course, you know, COVID happened and we didn't get a chance to do that. So I actually have an award that we're going to mail to you right here. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but basically it says Visionary Leadership Award presented to Dr. Lu Salman Canales. And the quote at the bottom says, through your leadership, you have enlarged the geography of hope And this is a quote from John Sisloff in
Oh,
his book, American Heroes, where he highlights individuals that go beyond the call of duty to step up and address inequities that they see in their communities. And as you stated, you played a significant role in us beginning the program. Actually, when you talked about finding like minded individuals, one of the reasons that I chose Texas for our program is because I knew you through Achieving the Dream, and I knew people and I knew the history of Texas, and I knew that we had the right kind of individual to bring about, positive change and developmental education in particular. And we know that if you had not opened the door to us, we wouldn't have had access to all these statewide players. And then once we decided that we're going to do community colleges, the role that you play bringing in El Paso and others. And of course, when John passed away, by the way, I'm sending you a copy of his memoir that he was writing when he passed away. And this little guy right here, it's him next to Martin Luther King when he was little. So you're going to get that in your package. But, basically, you were there when he was sick, and you
Right, because I'm
and you
remembering
were
that.
there when we had to change leadership, and you, without hesitation, went to see him at
Yeah.
the hospital, and you took the leadership role for the board of directors. And I want you to know that we love you, we appreciate you. You took a leap of faith in what we wanted to do, and we are proud to say that that the investment paid off. When the longitudinal study from the Texas Education Research Center says that our students get more certificates, more bachelor's degree, and more bachelor's degrees, um, that's really what we were trying to prove. That our students can learn. So when people tell Alejandra and everybody else that our students are not up to par, when people tell the dual students, that, they're not ready, we can say, we can show you that, yes, we can learn and we can succeed. Um, and we have a lot of evidence, we have the data, and we have a lot of recognitions. Excelencia just put us in their, database of programs that work. It was printed in the Bill Gates, newsletter. Um, so, you made a comment earlier, when you feel grief, you don't want to hear people to tell you to move on. And I know that people like Alejandra are feeling grief at times because they have battle fatigue, but we want them to know, and we will be there with them to help them show people that, yes, our students can learn. Yes, there are individuals that are committed and passionate about bringing about positive social change like you. And together, we can make a difference. So I want to thank you for all you have done for us. I will put this in the mail, and just thank you. And of course, I want to thank everybody else for joining us. And I'm hoping that we can all find something to be thankful about, uh, even though there has been a lot of pain and suffering and loss of jobs and all these terrible things that have been happening this year. Um, but know that together we can pull through, So muchas gracias. Love you very much.
Hi, guys.
And thank you
I
for
want to quickly announce that for next month we won't be having this a webinar due to the holidays. So apart from CTM, we want to wish everybody a happy holidays for this month and next month. We are going to be having our next webinar January 21st, 2021, with Dr. Cristobal Salinas, who will be speaking on the use of the term Latinx. So we want to cordially invite everybody to join us in the next year. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Canales, for the great presentation and discussion. And we are so proud and thankful for everything that you've done for Catch the X.
Thank you. I
Yes,
was
and-
remembering, Maria Marta, that I met John at Rockefeller Center. ¿Te acuerdas?
Mhm.
The first time I met him at Rockefeller Center in New York. And the last time I saw him